Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking into the disappearance and death of Daniela Vanne. She was a young mother from Mobile, Alabama, and she vanished in 2018. So for this deep dive, we've got some audio clips from the Case File podcast on Daniela's case. We'll also be looking at some social media posts from friends and family. The really strange thing about this case is that Daniela vanished after a night out with some friends. And then, get this, her car was missing for months. So was her death just a tragic accident like the police said, or is there more to the story? Well, that's what we're here to figure out, see if we can put the pieces together.
Yeah, this case is definitely a wild one. It kind of reminds me of those puzzles where you think you've got all the edges figured out, but then when you start to look closer, you realize a whole chunk is missing.
Exactly. So, to give everyone a little context, Daniela was working really hard to make a good life for herself and her daughter Cora. But it definitely seems like she had her fair share of struggles.
Oh, absolutely. She definitely had a lot on her plate, even from a young age. I mean, think about it. A difficult childhood, moving around constantly because her stepfather was in the military, a tough relationship with her mom. She was just searching for some stability, something she never really had.
And it seems like she found it, in some ways at least. She had Cora, she was working hard and saving money. She even saved up enough to buy herself a used Chevy Cruze, like a symbol of her independence, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Kind of taking control of her own life.
But sadly, she disappeared just one day after buying that car.
Yeah, it's almost ironic when you think about it. Like, this car that was supposed to represent a new chapter for her ends up at the heart of the mystery.
All right. All right, so let's go back to July 17th, 2018, the night Daniela vanished. The Case File episode gives a pretty detailed timeline of the events, so we'll use that as a guide.
Yeah, it's a good starting point.
So it all begins at this place called Heroes Sports Bar and Grill. That's where Daniela meets up with Randy. He was a former coworker. Later, Denson and Mallory join them in the bar, and then the group decides to head over to Dublin Pub. But Denson changes his mind and ends up going home.
Right, and that's where things start to get a little strange.
Yeah, like instead of going straight to Ollie's Mediterranean Grill, which is where the group was supposed to meet up later, Daniela is seen following Denson out of the Dublin Pub parking lot.
And based on the GPS data from her car, she follows him for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Before flashing her lights to get him to pull over. They end up stopping at this closed Shell gas station. I mean, think about it. Not exactly the kind of place you'd choose to stop at that hour. Especially when you consider that Case File mentioned there were open gas stations nearby. Even a Waffle House.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why that specific gas station, right? Like, was it just a random choice, or was there something else going on?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that keeps popping up.
And then there's the whole mystery surrounding Daniela's phone. So she tells Denson that she lost it. But later he finds it back at Dublin Pub. And it's strange because he tries calling her through Facebook Messenger, even though he had her phone in his hand.
Right. It's like he knew she wasn't going to answer. And then he doesn't even immediately give the phone to Mallory or Randy when he sees them again. Just offers to take it to P.F. Chang's the next day.
Yeah, why not just hand it over right then and there?
Exactly. It just raises more questions.
And then on top of that, you've got those creepy Facebook voice messages, the ones accidentally left from Denson's account to Daniela's.
Ugh, those are hard to listen to. You've got muffled voices, rustling sounds. It's really tough to make out exactly what's being said. But you can tell that something's happening.
Right, and to add to the creepiness, these messages were left just minutes after the last GPS ping from Daniela's car at that Shell gas station.
It's like something shifted right then and there.
Like someone hit the mute button on her life.
Makes you wonder if those messages and the sudden loss of GPS signal are connected.
So Daniela's gone, her card's vanished, and her family and friends are left with nothing but questions. They start searching desperately for answers. But the police investigation doesn't seem to be getting them very far. There's even a lot of criticism online about how the case is being handled.
Well, yeah, you can understand why they'd be frustrated. I mean, they're in the dark, grasping at any little bit of information.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole thing about the CCTV footage. So at first, Julie, Daniela's mom, she's told by the police that there's no footage. But then a news report shows that there is footage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what else might have been missed.
Totally. And all this time, nobody knows where Daniela's car is. It's like it just vanished.
Right.
And then after 9 long months, a shocking discovery.
9 months of pure anguish and uncertainty for her family and friends. It's hard to even imagine what they were going through. And then finally, a glimmer of hope. An off-duty police sergeant who's scouting locations for dive training finds a car submerged in the Bayou Sara River. It's Daniela's Chevy Cruze.
Wow. And Bayou Sara isn't exactly close by. It's miles from where Daniela was last seen. totally off her intended route. How did her car end up there?
That's the big question, right? Was she driving? Was the car towed? Did she even know this area? And then there's the whole thing about the condition of the car itself.
So it was underwater, obviously, but what else is strange about it?
Well, besides some damage to the front, it was actually in pretty decent shape. But here's the thing, the GPS was missing. And I don't mean disconnected, I mean completely gone. And remember, this GPS was hardwired into the car, like designed to be difficult to remove.
So someone went out of their way to take it out. Why go through all that trouble unless you didn't want anyone tracking the car's movements?
Exactly. Seems like someone was trying to cover their tracks. Doesn't really sound like a simple accident to me.
No, it really doesn't. And because of this discovery, the whole investigation shifts gears. The police announced that they're now treating it as a homicide.
Right, they're thinking that someone else was involved in her death. But as you'll see, that line of thinking doesn't last long.
So the police were treating it like a homicide. But then they totally flip-flop and say it was an accidental drowning. They say it's because the car was found in park, and there were no signs of foul play. But Daniela's family and friends just aren't buying it. And to be honest, I'm not so sure either.
Yeah, I can see why they'd be skeptical. There are just so many unanswered questions, so many things that don't line up with that accidental drowning conclusion.
Right, like, for starters, why was Daniela even in Bayou Sara in the first place?
It's miles from where she was last seen. Definitely not on her way to Ollie's. You don't just end up in a random spot like that by accident.
Exactly, it's not like you just stumble upon that place. You have to specifically drive there. And remember, Daniela didn't even have her phone with her. No GPS to guide her. I just can't picture her driving around in a totally unfamiliar area, especially if she was disoriented, and somehow ending up in that exact spot.
Okay, so let's say she did somehow drive into the river. Why didn't she try to get out? Well, the police report says the windows were rolled up and the doors were locked. But there's no reason she couldn't have opened them. The driver's side door had a button to unlock all the doors. Plus, there were individual buttons for each window. It just doesn't make sense.
And what about that rear passenger seatbelt that was missing? The one that wasn't there when the car was auctioned off? What happened to it? Why didn't the investigators ever even mention that?
It's a pretty big detail to just ignore. Makes you wonder if there was someone else in the car with her. And if so, what happened to them? It's like there are pieces of the story that we're just not seeing.
So, okay, the official explanation just doesn't really hold up. Let's look at some of the other theories. One that always comes up in cases like this is the idea that Daniela ran away. Like she just decided to start a new life.
It's definitely something to consider. People do disappear voluntarily sometimes.
But does that really fit with what we know about Daniela?
It's hard to say.
I mean, she was so devoted to her daughter, Cora. And remember those goals she wrote down in her journal? Setting up Cora's bedroom, going back to school, working on her positive attitude. Those sound like the goals of someone who's planning for the future, not someone who's about to vanish.
Yeah, you've got a point there. It does seem like she was looking forward to things.
And don't forget, all her stuff was left behind in her apartment. Her clothes, makeup, phone charger. It didn't look like someone packing up to leave.
That's true. And case file even mentioned that whiteboard she had, the one where she was tracking her savings goals. It sounds like she had a decent amount of money saved up, but none of that money was ever found. You'd think she would have taken it with her if she was planning to disappear.
Right, it just doesn't add up. So maybe she didn't run away. But what if her death was an accident? Maybe she got lost somehow. Or maybe she was disoriented and drove into the river without realizing it.
Well, that brings up the question of her state of mind that night. We know she had been drinking. And there's a chance she might have also been taking her painkillers.
Oh yeah, that's right. They found an empty pill bottle in her purse.
Exactly. So it's possible that impaired judgment played a role in what happened.
It's definitely something to think about. Remember that text message she sent to Hannah earlier that evening? The one where she said, okay, I'm going to drive now. But should I? I don't know. It kind of sounds like she was already questioning her own ability to drive safely.
Yeah, that's a little concerning. And mixing painkillers and alcohol is never a good idea. It can lead to drowsiness, poor coordination, bad decisions. It's definitely possible that combination could have contributed to an accident.
But even if she was disoriented, how in the world did she end up all the way out in Bayou Sara? It's miles away from where she was last seen. And without her phone, she wouldn't have had GPS. It's hard to imagine her just driving around aimlessly and ending up in that particular spot.
Yeah, that's the part that doesn't quite fit with the accident theory.
Yeah. So we've got the runaway theory that doesn't seem to hold up. We've got the accident theory, which has some holes. Which leaves us with a much more unsettling possibility. Foul play. Was Daniela the victim of a crime? And if so, who could have been responsible?
Well, we can't ignore the fact that the last people to see Daniela alive were Denson, Mallory, and Randy.
Right.
So is there anything about their backgrounds or their actions that night that stands out to you?
Well, case file mentioned that Denson and Randy both had some trouble with the law in the past. Denson had arrests for drug possession and DUI, and Randy had arrests for drug possession, stolen property, and DUI. I mean, obviously, that's not proof of anything, but it does make you think about the kind of lives they were leading.
Right, it gives you some insight into their choices. And then there are those inconsistencies in their statements and actions that night. The whole thing with Daniela's phone, those weird Facebook voice messages, it all just adds to the suspicion.
Yeah, and then when you combine that with the fact that Daniela's car was found in such a remote location, miles from where she was last seen, and with the GPS removed, you really start to wonder if someone was trying to cover up a crime.
Yeah, getting rid of the GPS is a pretty classic move. Makes it a lot harder to track the car's movements. Doesn't sound like an accident to me.
But if someone did hurt Daniela, what would their motive be?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We have to consider all the possibilities.
Mm.
Could it have been a robbery gone wrong? She did have a good amount of cash that was never found.
Yeah, that's true. Or maybe it had something to do with her past. We don't know a lot about Daniela's early life. It's possible there are people out there who might have wanted to harm her for reasons we don't even know about.
Yeah, there could be a whole backstory that we're not aware of.
And of course, we can't rule out the possibility of a random act of violence. Mobile has a pretty high crime rate. Sometimes these things happen for no reason at all.
It's a sad reality.
But even in cases of random violence, there's usually some kind of evidence. A witness, something to point the investigators in the right direction. But in Daniela's case, those crucial pieces seem to be missing.
And that's what's so frustrating for her loved ones. They feel like the investigation was botched, that important evidence was overlooked or dismissed.
And honestly, it's hard to blame them for feeling that way. They've lost someone they loved, and they deserve answers. The police seem to have settled on this accidental drowning theory, even though there are so many unanswered questions like justice delayed if not denied.
You could say that again. It's a real tragedy on so many levels, and it showed you that even with all the technology and investigative tools we have today, sometimes the truth can still remain hidden.
Daniela's case really makes you think, even with all the technology we have today, people can just disappear and leave behind so much heartbreak.
It's true. It's a scary thought. And while we may never know exactly what happened to Daniela, I think it's important to remember the impact her absence had on her loved ones, especially her daughter, Cora.
Right. Cora was only 5 when they found Daniela's car, and she's been living with Julie and Patrick. They got full custody after Daniela disappeared. How do you even begin to explain something like this to a child?
It's heartbreaking to even think about. How do you make sense of a missing person? The possibility of foul play, the fact that there might never be a real answer? It's just an incredibly difficult situation.
It really says a lot about Julie and Patrick, that they were able to give Cora some stability and normalcy in the middle of such a tragedy.
Absolutely. And it's also really heartwarming to hear that Tyler, Cora's father, he really stepped up too. He got sober and focused on getting a job to provide for his daughter. It seems like Cora's love was a powerful force in his life.
It's amazing how love and hope can shine through even in the darkest of times. And speaking of hope, Daniela's family and friends haven't given up on finding justice for her.
Not at all.
They're still searching for answers, still holding on to the belief that someone out there knows something.
They've been doing everything they can. Organizing vigils, handing out flyers. They even put up billboards with Daniela's picture, asking for anyone with information to come forward. They're determined to keep her memory alive and make sure her case isn't forgotten.
It's truly inspiring to see their dedication. They refuse to let her become just another unsolved mystery.
It's a reminder that the search for truth and justice, it can be a long and difficult journey, but it takes unwavering commitment, even when the path ahead seems uncertain.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Daniela Vanne's case, what are some of the key takeaways? What stays with us after looking at all the details?
I think for me it's a reminder that every missing person is more than just a headline, more than just a bunch of facts and theories. It's a real human story, filled with love, loss, and unanswered questions. And it's up to all of us to remember these stories, to keep asking questions, and to never give up on seeking justice for those who've been silenced.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it also reminds us that the truth can be really hard to find. Sometimes even when we put in all the effort, the pieces just don't seem to fit together. But that doesn't mean we should stop searching for answers.
Absolutely. And as we close this chapter, we want to leave you with one final question to think about. What do you believe happened to Daniela Vanne?
We encourage you to go back and think about everything we discussed today. Consider all the evidence and the different theories, and come to your own conclusions.
And if you have any information at all, even if you think it's insignificant, please reach out to the mobile police department. Every little detail can help bring us closer to the truth and closer to justice for Daniela.
We'll be sure to include links in the show notes so you can learn more about Daniela's case. This case is still open, and any new information could make a huge difference. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the disappearance of Daniela Vanne. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and never let the flame of hope die out for those who've been lost.